Welcome back. In our previous lecture, we explored Castle's and Miller's idea that migration is a structural long run feature of the global system. Today, we move from structure to outcome to what happens after migration, how newcomers find their place in Europe's labor markets, and how those markets, in turn, shape the quality of inclusion. We'll trace the links between economic structures, policy regimes, and everyday work experiences, from high skilled sectors to precarious employment, to understand what labor market inclusion really means. Section 1. What do we mean by labor market inclusion? Labor market inclusion refers to migrants' access to decent, stable, and fairly paid employment. It is one of the strongest indicators of integration because work determines income, social status, and access to welfare. Yet, inclusion is more than having a job. It involves equality of opportunity, mobility within the labor hierarchy, and recognition of skills. Castles and Miller remind us that economic participation is a structural outcome, an individual achievement. Migrants' position in labor markets reflect the interaction between global labor demand, national regulations, and employers' strategies. When policy and economy misalign, migrants often end up concentrated in low-wage or informal sectors, even when they hold high qualifications. In Europe, this mismatch is visible everywhere. Engineers driving taxi, nurses working as cleaners, PhD holders doing delivery work. These are not accidents. They are the byproducts of credential barriers, language filters, and segmented labor structures. Section 2. Segmentation. How labor markets sort people. Economists and sociologists describe European labor markets as a segmented system divided into primary and secondary sectors. The primary sector offers stability, benefits, and advancements. The secondary sector relies on flexible, low paid labor. Migrants, especially newcomers, are overrepresented in that secondary tier. Castles and Miller interpret segmentation as part of capitalism's need for differentiated labor. Employers and states maintain a flexible workforce to fill gaps without expanding rights too far. This means migrants are often included economically but excluded socially, present in the economy, absent from equality. Think of agriculture in Spain and Italy, construction in Germany, or care work in France and the Netherlands. These industries depend on migrant labor, yet they often offer few routes to security. Workers may rotate through short contracts, subcontracting chains, or informal networks that keep wages low. Segmentation also reproduces itself generationally. Children of migrants may access education, yet still face barriers in professional recruitment. A reminder that inclusion is not automatic, even in second generation. Section 3. Policy regimes and work access. Policy regimes determine who can work, for how long, and in what sectors. Within the EU, freedom of movement applies to member state citizens, but third country nationals rely on visas or asylum based work permits. These legal categories create hierarchies of access. For example, Sweden and Portugal designed inclusive labor policies that link a residence status quickly for work authorization. In contrast, systems that delay access, like Italy's lengthy regularization processes, push people into informal work while they wait. Policy design, therefore, doesn't just regulate migration, it actively reshapes labor market outcomes. European institutions have recognized this. The EU's Skills and Talent Package and Blue Card Directive aim to attract and retain high skilled workers, while seasonal and domestic workers remain governed by temporary, less protected schemes. The result is a dual regime: privileged mobility for some, controlled precarity for others. Inclusion improves when states reduce bureaucratic friction, recognize foreign credentials, and link language training to employment pathways. Germany's post-2015 reforms, for instance, expanded integration courses tied to vocational programs, an example of policy creating real mobility. Section 4. The role of employers and institutions. Policies set the rules, but employers and intermediaries play the game. Recruiters, agencies, and subcontractors mediate access to work, often shaping migrants' experience more than government does. When recruitment is transparent, inclusion grows. When it is opaque, exploitation thrives. Take the logistics hubs around Rotterdam or the meat processing plants in Germany. Both rely on transnational subcontracting chains, where migrant workers are technically employed by agencies abroad. This structure lowers costs but weakens rights and accountability. Perfect example: how structural forces translate into lived inequality. Labor unions and civil society organizations act as counterweights, In countries like Belgium and Denmark, strong collective bargaining has narrowed wage gaps between native and migrant workers. Elsewhere, weak unionization leaves migrant isolated. Inclusion therefore depends on institutional density, the presence of organizations that enforce fair standards and provide support. Without them, even well-written policies can fail in practice. Section 5. Gender and care work. Labor market inclusion is not gendered. Women migrants often enter through domestic or care sectors, work that is essential yet undervalued. Castles and Miller note that global care chains connect households across borders. A Filipino nurse in Rome supports both Italian families and her own relatives in Manila. This dual role illustrates how labor and transnational ties overlap. European demand for elder care and child care continues to grow with aging populations. Policies rarely classify domestic work as a skill, yet it sustains the welfare system of entire countries. Inclusion for these workers mean not only legal status, but also recognition, transforming help into professional labor with rights and dignity. Section 6. Skill recognition and mobility. Another key barrier is credential recognition. Europe hosts thousands of migrants with degrees that go unused because their qualifications are not recognized. This is a structural waste of human capital. Some states have started to address it. France's validation, the EQUA, Dell experience, allows workers to certify skills gained abroad. Japanese system simplifies recognition procedures. But across the continent, the process remains slow and uneven. When migrants' skills are undervalued, they cluster in survival jobs, delaying integration and reducing tax contribution. A lose-lose scenario. Inclusion means valuing what migrants bring, not merely absorbing them into low tiers. Section 7. Precarity, informality, and the pandemic test. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the paradox of migrant labor in Europe. Indispensable yet disposable. Migrant nurses, cleaners, and delivery riders kept societies running, but many lacked stable contracts or social protection. Border closures also revealed dependence. Crops unharvested. Hospitals understaffed. Castles and Miller would interpret this as a structural contradiction. Advanced economies rely on mobility, but politically constrain it. Inclusion, therefore, cannot be built on temporary gratitude. It requires durable rights and institutional reform. Section 8. Indicators and outcomes. Researchers measure labor market inclusion through employment rates, wage gaps, job stability, and skill utilization. Across Europe, migrants are employed at lower rates and earn less than native workers with similar qualifications. Yet variation is large. Nordic countries and Portugal shows narrower gaps. Southern and eastern state wider ones. This diversity proves that inclusion is not destiny, it is design. Policies that combine early labor access, active integration programs, and anti-discrimination enforcement produce better outcomes. Where those elements are absent, exclusion persists across generations. Section 9. Connecting back to Castles and Miller. Let's return to the theoretical frame. Castles and Miller view migration as part of global capitalism's restructuring. Labor market inclusion, then, is the domestic phase of the structure. Economic demand pulls migrants in, policy regimes filter them, employers allocate them, and social institutions decide whether inclusion is genuine or symbolic. In other words, labor market outcomes are not random. They are systematic products of states and markets co-produce mobility. To conclude, labor market inclusion is the testing ground of migration theory. It reveals how structure translates into everyday life, works securely and without recognition. Castles and Miller help us to see these patterns are not individual misfortunes, but systematic arrangements. The challenge for Europe is to turn economic dependence into social equality, make inclusion more than participation, make it empowerment. In our next lecture, we'll move forward to enforcing inclusion, exploring how space policy and everyday life intersect to shape belonging into Europe's cities. Thank you for listening.